Thank you for tuning in to Finish the Fight, a gaming podcast. If you have not, be sure to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/finish the fight, where we have some amazing merch and plenty of other things for you guys. Welcome back to Finish the Fight, a gaming podcast,
where we produce and develop the highest quality gaming research in podcast form.
I'm your host, Alex Kendall.
And I am your host, Derek Baker.
And today we're talking about the grandpappy of all stealth games, or at least in the modern age of them. And we're going to be talking about, well, at least the third in the series of the Metal Gear games, and it's going to be Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid took them 3 tries to really break it big in the market, but they certainly did that. I mean, you've got a Metal Gear character that was asked for a very long time as a Smash playable fighter, which I think is sort of like being inducted into the Hall of Fame of video game characters in a way, you know. It is just a nice showcase of how popular that character has become. The Metal Gear Solid is absolutely loved by many and has a ton of modern fans today.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, the franchise branched out several years, still producing games to today. And it's amazing to see where it's come from, and kind of in the OG ones, very much a majority stealth based, into now such a fun mix with that kind of Japanese charm to it of silliness, but also like seriousness and a story overtone. It's really cool to see. So let's talk about Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid is an action-adventure stealth video game developed and published by Konami for the PlayStation in 1998. It was directed, produced, and written by Hideo Kojima, and follows the MSX2 video games Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, which Kojima also worked on. It was unveiled at the 1996 Tokyo Game Show and then demonstrated at trade shows including the 1997 E3. Its Japanese release was originally planned for late 1997 before being delayed to 1998. Players control Solid Snake, a soldier who infiltrates a nuclear weapons facility to neutralize the terrorist threat from Foxhound, a renegade special forces unit. Snake must liberate hostages and stop the terrorists from launching a nuclear strike. Cinematic cutscenes were rendered using the in-game engine and graphics, and voice acting is used throughout. Now, Metal Gear Solid received critical acclaim. It sold more than 7 million copies worldwide and shipped 12 million demos. It is regarded as one of the greatest and most important video games of all time, and helped popularize the stealth genre and in-engine cinematic cutscenes. It was followed by an expanded version for PlayStation and Windows, Metal Gear Solid Integral in 1999, and a GameCube remake, Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes in 2004. The game was later ported by M2 and included as part of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 compilation for the Switch, PS4, PS5, Windows, and Xbox Series S and X in 2023. It produced numerous sequels, starting with Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty in 2001, and media adaptations including a radio drama, comics, and novels.
So let's talk a little bit about the studio. This one goes back a little further than a lot of the video game studios that we've talked about, with the exception, I think, of the more recent episode of Joust. But this company was founded on March 21st, 1969, and was officially incorporated under the name Konami Industry Company Limited on March 19th, 1973. The company's founder and chairman, Kagemasa Kazuki, also known as Kaz Kazuki, ran a jukebox rental and repair business in Toyonaka, Osaka, before transforming the business into a manufacturer of amusement machines for video arcades. Their first coin-operated video game was released in 1978, and they began exporting products to the United States the following year. Konami began to achieve success with arcade games in the early 1980s, starting with Scramble in 1981, followed by hits such as Frogger, Super Cobra, Time Pilot, Rock and Rope, Track and Field, and Yi Are Kung Fu. Many of their early games were licensed to other companies for US release, including Century, Stern Electronics, Sega, and Gremlin Industries. They established their U.S. subsidiary, Konami Incorporated, in November 1982. Initially based in Torrance, California, they would later move to Buffalo Grove, Illinois, in 1984 following their acquisition of arcade distributor Interlogic Incorporated, with Interlogic founder and president Ben Harrell serving as president of Konami Incorporated. It was during this period that Konami began expanding their video game business into the home consumer market, following a brief stint releasing video games for the Atari 2600 in 1982 for the US. The company released numerous games for the MSX home computer standard in 1983, followed by the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985. Numerous Konami franchises were established during this period on both platforms, as well as the arcades such as Gradius, Castlevania, Twin Bee, Gone Bear Goemon, Contra, and Metal Gear, in addition to success with hit license games such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Due to the success of their arcade and NES games, Konami's earnings grew from $10 million in 1987 to $300 million in 1991. The first TMNT arcade game in 1989 was Konami's highest-grossing arcade game, and is still to this day one of my favorite games of all time. It's not the original TMNT arcade game, but it is the third one, the Manhattan Project, that Konami did.
Well, and I think really, sorry to sidetrack to TMNT for this podcast now, I think these are really some of the best beat 'em up arcades that there were out there.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it took so many of the elements of earlier editions, even later ones, and just made them better in the TMNT universe. Even like going into like Simpsons Hit and Run, the other arcade cabinet kind of stuff. I think it's Hit and Run's a game, but the Simpsons cabinet was so much fun with that too, with the fun beat 'em ups with that. So Konami, thank you.
Konami did great. And yeah, I think there's an X-Men one as well that's pretty good. Yeah, they had that whole thing down, and that's where, I mean, my fondness for them goes. Metal Gear, obviously a very different game, but shows that they sort of understand, I think, the realm in which they're trying to work.
Exactly. So in June 1991, Konami's legal name was changed to Konami Company Limited, and their headquarters were relocated to Minato, Tokyo in April of 1993. The company started supporting the 16-bit video game consoles during this period, starting with the Super NES in 1990, followed by the PC Engine in 1991, and the Sega Genesis in 1992. After the launch of the Sega Saturn and PlayStation in 94, Konami became a business divisional organization with the formation of various Konami Computer Entertainment, or KCE, subsidiaries, starting with KCE Tokyo and KCE Osaka, later known as KCE Studios, in April of 1995, followed by KCE Japan, later known as Kojima Productions, in April of 1996. Each KCE subsidiary created different intellectual properties, such as KCE Tokyo's Silent Hill series and KCE Japan's Metal Gear Solid series, a revival of the Metal Gear series on MSX.
So let's talk about the development for Metal Gear. Director Hideo Kojima originally planned his third Metal Gear game in 1994 for the 3DO interactive multiplayer. Kojima was initially planning Metal Gear Solid, while Policenauts, released in 1994, was still in development. Conceptual artwork by Yoji Shinkawa of the character Solid Snake, Meryl Silverberg, who was also a character in the adventure game Policenauts, and the Foxhound team were included in the Policenauts pilot disc, preceding the release of the full version of the 3DO game in 1995. After the 3DO was discontinued, development shifted to the PlayStation after Policenauts was released. The game was titled Metal Gear Solid rather than Metal Gear 3, as Kojima felt that the previous MSX2 games that he worked on were not widely known, due to the fact that they were not released in North America and only the first one was released in Europe. An NES version of the first Metal Gear was released in North America, but Kojima had no involvement with it or its sequel, Snake's Revenge. The word Solid derived from the codename of series protagonist Solid Snake, as well as the title of the second MSX2 game, was chosen not only to represent the fact that it was the third entry of the series, but also the transition from 2D to 3D computer graphics. Considering first person games difficult to control, the team opted to give the gameplay a 2D style by having it predominantly played from an overhead angle while using 3D graphics and the ability to switch to first person on the fly to make it feel as though the game were taking place in a real 3D world.
Development for Metal Gear Solid began in mid 1995. Developers aimed for accuracy and realism while making the game enjoyable and tense. In the early stages of development, the Huntington Beach SWAT team educated the creators with a demonstration of vehicles, weapons, and explosives. Weapons expert Motasada Mori was also tapped as a technical advisor in the research, which included visits to Fort Irwin and firing sessions at Stembridge Gun Rentals. Kojima stated that, quote, "If the player isn't tricked into believing that the world is real, then there's no point in making this game." To fulfill this, adjustments were made to every detail, such as individually designed desks. The characters and mecha designs were made by artist Yoji Shinakawa based on Kojima's concepts. When designing props and hardware, he first built plastic models at home and then drew the final designs from the models. According to Shinkawa, Solid Snake's physique in this particular installment was based on Jean-Claude Van Damme, while his facial appearance was based on Christopher Walken. Konami had decided that the middle-aged appearance of Snake in the previous games did not do very good for commercial appeal and opted to redesign him so that he would look younger. The characters were completed by polygonal artists using brush drawings and clay models by Shinkawa. According to Kojima, the ninja's cloaking effect is the result of a bug. Of course, it wasn't totally a coincidence since we wanted that effect anyway, but we did get a somewhat unexpected result. Kojima wanted greater interaction with objects in the environment, such as allowing the player to hide in bodies in a storage compartment. Additionally, he wanted a full orchestra right next to the player, a system which made modifications such as tempo and texture to the currently played track instead of switching to another pre-recorded track. Although these features could not be achieved, they were implemented in Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty.
Kojima used Lego building blocks and toy figurines to model 3D areas and see what the planned camera views would look like. The game was developed by a staff of 20 people, a small team for such a major title. Kojima preferred to have a smaller team so that he got to know everyone in the team and what they were working on and could know if anyone was sick or unhappy. The team size did not expand to full strength until September 1996. Initially, there was only a single programmer working on the game's code. Because the developers wanted the game's action to be stylized and movie-like rather than realistic, they opted not to use motion capture, instead having an artist with experience in anime design the animations by hand. A gameplay demo of Metal Gear Solid was first revealed to the public at the 1996 Tokyo Game Show and was later shown at E3 1997 as a short video. The 1997 version had several differences, including a more controllable camera and blue-colored vision cones. The demo generated significant buzz and positive reviews at the event for its game design emphasizing stealth and strategy, like earlier Metal Gear games, its presentation, and the unprecedented level of real-time 3D graphical detail for the PlayStation. The enthusiastic response to the game at E3 took Kojima by surprise and increased his expectations for the game's performance in the American market. The game's Japanese release was originally planned for late 1997 but was delayed to 1998. It was playable for the first time at the Tokyo Game Show in 1998 and released the same year in Japan with an extensive promotional campaign. Television and magazine advertisements, in-store samples, and demo giveaways contributed to a total of $8 million in promotional costs.
Now, as far as the gameplay goes, the player must navigate the protagonist, Solid Snake, through a nuclear weapons facility without being detected by enemies. When Snake moves into an enemy's field of vision, he sets off in alert mode that draws enemies. The player must then hide until evasion mode begins. When the counter reaches 0, the game returns to infiltration mode, where enemies are no longer suspicious. The radar cannot be used in alert or evasion mode. In addition to the stealth gameplay, set piece sequences entail firefights between the player and enemies. To remain undetected, the player can perform techniques which make use of Snake's abilities and the environment, such as crawling under objects, using boxes as cover, ducking or hiding around walls, and making noise to distract enemies. An on screen radar provides the player with the location of nearby enemies and their field of vision. Snake can also make use of many items and gadgets, such as infrared goggles and a cardboard box disguise. The emphasis on stealth promotes a less violent form of gameplay, as fights against large groups of enemies will often result in severe damage to Snake. Despite the switch to 3D, the game is still played primarily from an overhead perspective, similar to the original 2D Metal Gear games. However, the camera angle will change during certain situations, such as a corner view when Snake flattens himself to a wall next to an open space, or into first person when crawling under tight spaces or when equipping certain items such as the binoculars or a sniper rifle. The player can also use the first person view while remaining idle to look around Snake's surroundings and see what's ahead of him.
Progress is punctuated by cutscenes and codec, as well as encounters with bosses. To progress, players must discover the weaknesses of each boss and defeat them. Play controls and strategies can also be accessed via the codec, a radio communication device where advice is delivered from Snake's support team. For example, the support team may chastise Snake for not saving his progress often enough, or explain his combat moves in terms of which buttons to press on the gamepad. The codec is also used to provide exposition on the game's backstory. In addition to the main story, there is also a VR training mode in which the player can test out their sneaking skills in a series of artificially constructed environments. This mode is divided into 3 main categories: practice, time attack, and gun shooting, each consisting of 10 stages. After completing all 30 stages, a survival mission is unlocked in which the player must sneak their way through 10 consecutive stages under a 7-minute limit. And so let's move over a little bit more into the story of Metal Gear Solid, and we'll start by talking about the setting and then the characters. Metal Gear Solid takes place in an alternate history in which the Cold War continued into the 1990s, ending at some point near the end of the 20th century. The game's events take place 6 years after the downfall of Zanzibarland and form the 3rd chapter in an overarching plot concerning the character of Solid Snake.
Now, as Derek said, we'll go to the characters. We all know the protagonist, Solid Snake, a legendary infiltrator and saboteur. During the mission, Snake receives support and advice via codec radio. Colonel Roy Campbell, Solid Snake's former commanding officer, supports Snake with information and tactics. While he initially keeps some secrets from Snake, he gradually reveals them. He is joined by Naomi Hunter, who gives medical advice, Natasha Romanenko, who provides items and weapon tips, Master Miller, a former drill instructor and survival coach, and Mei Ling, who invented the Silician radar system used in the mission and is also in charge of mission data. The player can call her to save the game. The main antagonist of the game is Liquid Snake, leader of a now terrorist splinter cell of the organization Foxhound, and genetic counterpart to Solid Snake. An elite special forces unit, Foxhound contains experts specializing in different tasks. Members are Revolver Ocelot, a Western-style gunslinger and expert interrogator whose weapon of choice is the Colt Single Action Army. We got Sniper Wolf, a preternatural sniper, Vulcan Raven, a hulking Alaskan shaman armed with an M61 Vulcan torn from a downed F-16, Psychomantis, a psychic profiler and psychokinesis expert, and Decoy Octopus, a master of disguise. Basically, the greatest grouping of named people you will ever find on this planet. Now, other characters include Meryl Silverberg, Colonel Campbell's niece, and a rookie soldier stationed in Shadow Moses who did not join the revolt, Dr. Hal Emmerich, the lead developer of Metal Gear Rex, and Gray Fox, also known as the Ninja, a mysterious cybernetically enhanced agent who is neither an ally nor an enemy of Snake, but does oppose Foxhound.
And so for the plot, it takes place in 2005, where a renegade genetically enhanced Special Forces unit, Foxhound, seized control of a remote island in Alaska's Fox Archipelago codenamed Shadow Moses, which houses a nuclear weapons disposal facility. Foxhound threatens to use the nuclear-capable mecha Metal Gear Rex, being secretly tested at the facility against the US government, if they do not receive the remains of Big Boss and a ransom of $1 billion within 24 hours. Solid Snake is forced out of retirement by Colonel Roy Campbell to infiltrate the island and neutralize the threat. Snake enters the facility via an air vent and locates the first hostage, DARPA Chief Donald Anderson. Anderson reveals that Metal Gear Rex can be deactivated with a secret detonation override code, but dies of a heart attack. Colonel Campbell's niece, Meryl Silverberg, held hostage in a neighboring cell, helps Snake escape. Snake locates another hostage, ArmsTech President Kenneth Baker, but is confronted by Foxhound member Revolver Ocelot. Their gunfight is interrupted by a mysterious cyborg ninja who cuts off Ocelot's right hand. Baker briefs Snake on the Metal Gear project and advises him to contact Meryl, whom he gave a PAL card that might prevent the launch, but he too dies of a sudden heart attack.
Over codec, Meryl agrees to meet in the warhead disposal area on the condition that Snake contacts Metal Gear's designer, Dr. Hal Otacon Emmerich. En route, Snake receives an anonymous codec call calling themselves Deep Throat, warning him of a tank ambush. Snake fends off the attack from Vulcan Raven and proceeds to the rendezvous, where he locates Otacon. The ninja reappears, and Snake realizes it is his former ally Gray Fox, believed dead. Devastated over learning Rex's true intentions, Otacon agrees to aid Snake remotely using special camouflage to procure information and supplies. Snake meets Meryl and receives the PAL card. As they head for the underground base, Meryl is possessed by psychic Psycho Mantis and pulls her gun on Snake. He disarms her and defeats Mantis, who informs Snake that he has a large place in her heart. After they reach the underground passageway, Sniper Wolf ambushes them, wounds Meryl, and captures Snake. Liquid confirms Snake's suspicion that they are twin brothers. After being tortured by Ocelot, Snake is confused to discover Anderson's body in his cell, seemingly dead for days. He escapes with the help of Otacon, makes his way up the communications tower, and fends off a Hindi helicopter attack from Liquid. As he emerges onto a snowfield, he is confronted again by Sniper Wolf. He kills her, devastating Otacon, who was infatuated with her.
Snake continues to Rex's hangar and is ambushed again by Raven. After Snake defeats him, Raven tells Snake that the Anderson he conversed with was, in fact, Foxhound disguise artist Decoy Octopus. Infiltrating Metal Gear's hangar, Snake overhears Liquid and Ocelot preparing the Rex launch sequence and uses the PAL card, but this unexpectedly activates Rex. Liquid reveals that he has been impersonating Snake's advisor, Master Miller, and that Foxhound has used Snake to facilitate Rex's launch. He and Snake are the product of the Les Enfants Terribles project, a 1970s government program to clone Big Boss. He also reveals to Snake the government's true reason for sending him. Snake is unknowingly carrying a weaponized FoxDie virus that causes cardiac arrest in Foxhound members on contact, allowing the government to retrieve Rex undamaged. As Liquid in Rex battles Snake, Gray Fox appears. He reveals to Snake that he was Deep Throat, destroys Rex's radome, and is crushed to death by Rex. Snake destroys Rex and defeats Liquid, then escapes with Meryl or Otacon via a tunnel, pursued by Liquid in a jeep. After their vehicles crash, Liquid pulls a gun on Snake but dies from FoxDie. Colonel Campbell, briefly ousted from command, calls off a nuclear strike to destroy evidence of the operation and has Snake registered as killed in action to stop the US government searching for him. Naomi Hunter, who injected Snake with the FoxDie virus, tells him that he has an indeterminate amount of time before it kills him. Ocelot calls the US president. He was a double agent whose mission was to steal Baker's disc of Metal Gear specifications.
So, if you haven't played this, or if you remember playing this, it's such a wild story ride. And Kojima does this in just so many of the Metal Gear series, of just like this wild conspiracy of just these awesome characters and governmental issues. It's amazing.
It's got a real 80s vibe to it. to me, where it's just like an 80s action hero, like, no, I'm retired.
Yes.
You're going to pull me out of retirement just for this. Yeah, you got one last ride, buddy. Sorry. And then you find out, oh man, he's in way too deep. He's actually part of this huge conspiracy. Of course, he was never going to retire. They were never going to let him out.
No, it's never going. So it's awesome. So another awesome thing, as I do awesome segues, is the music and sound of the game. The musical score of Metal Gear Solid was composed by Konami's in-house musicians, including Kazuki Muraoka, Hiroyuki Togo, Takanori Ishiyama, Lee Jong Myung, and Maki Kirioka. Composer and lyricist Rika Muranaka provided a song called The Best Is Yet to Come for the game's ending credits sequence. The main theme was composed by Tapi Iwase from the Konami Kukihiya Club. Music played in-game has a synthetic feel, with increased pace and introduction of strings during tense moments, with a looping style endemic to video games. Overtly cinematic music with stronger orchestral and choral elements appears in cutscenes, and the soundtrack was released on September 23, 1998, under the King Records label. Now, except for David Hayter, who voices Solid Snake, the English voice cast was credited with pseudonyms. Reportedly, this was done because the Screen Actors Guild's rules at the time were unclear regarding performances for video games, and when the actors returned for the 2004 remake Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, they were credited with their real names.
Metal Gear Solid was first released for the PlayStation in Japan on September 3, 1998. The game was available in a standard edition as well as a limited premium package edition, sold in a large box that also contained a t-shirt, a pair of Foxhound-themed dog tags, memory card stickers, an audio CD featuring the soundtracks from the MSX2 Metal Gear games, including a few bonus arranged tracks, and a 40-page booklet, Metal Gear Solid Classified, featuring production notes, interviews with the developers, and a glossary of terminology in the game. The North American version was released a month later on October 20th. Changes and additions were made to this version, such as a choice of 3 difficulty settings when starting a new game, with a 4th setting that is unlocked after completing the game once. An alternate tuxedo outfit for Snake, which the character wears on every 3rd playthrough on the same save file, and a demo theater mode where the player views every cutscene and radio conversations relevant to the main story. Jeremy Bloston, who previously worked on the English localization of Snatcher for the Sega CD, wrote the English version of the script. One change in the English script was the addition of Western sources and authors to Mei Ling's pool of motivational quotes. Originally, the character only cited Chinese proverbs natively, providing an explanation afterward in Japanese, but this proved challenging to adapt during the translation. The games detected by Psycho Mantis when he reads the player's memory card were also changed, due to certain games such as the Tokimeki Memorial series not being released outside Japan. This resulted in Kojima's cameo, in which he thanks the player for supporting his work via a voiceover, being cut from the Western versions, as save data from 2 PlayStation games not available outside Japan, Snatcher and Policenauts, needed to be present on the player's memory card for this Easter egg to appear.
The game was launched in Europe on February 22, 1999, with versions voiced in French, Italian, and German available in addition to English. A Spanish-dubbed version was later released on May 1st. Like in Japan, a limited edition of the game was released, although the contents of the European limited edition differs from the Japanese counterpart. The European premium package comes with the game's software itself and its soundtrack album CD, along with a t-shirt, dog tags, memory card stickers, a double-sided movie-style poster, and a set of postcards. The Japanese PlayStation version of Metal Gear Solid was reissued twice, once under the Best series and later under PS1 books. Likewise, the American and European versions of Metal Gear Solid were reissued under the Greatest Hits and Platinum series, respectively. The game is included in the Japanese Metal Gear Solid 20th Anniversary Collection set and in the American Essential Collection set. The original Metal Gear Solid was released on the PlayStation Store for download on the PS3 and PlayStation Portable on March 21, 2008 in Japan, and on June 18th, 2009 in North America, and on November 19th of the same year in Europe. Metal Gear Solid is one of the 20 PlayStation games included in the PlayStation Classic released in 2018. The game is included in both the Japanese and Western models of the unit in their respective version.
And so there was also an expanded version for Metal Gear Solid called it Integral, and it was released on June 25th, 1999 for the PlayStation in Japan. The expanded version of the game features added content from the American and European versions. It replaces the Japanese voices from the original version with the English dub, offering players a choice between Japanese and English subtitles during cutscenes and codec conversations. Item descriptions, mission logs, and other text are still in Japanese. Further additional content to the main game, including an alternate sneaking suit outfit for Meryl, which she wears when Snake is dressed in the tuxedo, a very easy difficulty setting where the player starts the mission armed with a suppressor-equipped MP5 submachine gun with infinite ammo, substituting the FAMAS rifle in Snake's inventory. An 8th codec frequency featuring commentary from the development team, unvoiced and in Japanese text only, on every area and boss encounter, hidden music tracks, an alternate game mode where the player controls Snake from a first-person perspective on normal difficulty only, an option for alternative patrol routes for enemies, and a downloadable Pocket Station minigame. The torture event was also made easier, reducing the number of rounds to 3 per session on all 5 difficulty settings. The VR training mode was then stored on a separate third disc known as the VR disc, and had been expanded into 300 missions. These new set of missions were divided into 4 main categories: sneaking, weapons, advanced, and special. The first 3 categories feature standard training exercises that test the player's sneaking, shooting, and combat skills, while the 4th category contains less conventional tests, involving murder mysteries, giant genome soldiers, and flying saucers. One particular set of missions has the player controlling the cyborg ninja, unlocked by either completing a minigame on the Pocket Station and uploading the data to the VR disc, or by achieving the Fox rank on the main game. Completing all 300 missions will unlock a concept artwork of Metal Gear Ray, a mech that would later appear in Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Additional content included preview trailers of Metal Gear Solid from trade events and a photo shoot mode where the player could take photographs of fully expressive polygonal models of Mei Ling and Dr. Naomi after completing the main game. Famitsu magazine rated Metal Gear Solid Integral a 34 out of 40. The VR disc from Integral was released by itself during the same year in other regions as Metal Gear Solid VR Missions in North America on September 23rd, and as Metal Gear Solid Special Missions in the PAL region on October 29th. While the content of both VR missions and special missions are virtually identical to the VR disc, the unlocking requirements for the ninja missions and the photoshoot mode were changed accordingly, so that save data from the main game was no longer required. The special missions version also adds an additional requirement in which the user must also own a copy of the original Metal Gear Solid in PAL format in order to start the game. After booting special missions on the console, the player will be asked to switch the disc with the first disc for Metal Gear Solid to load data before asking the player to switch back to the special missions disc to proceed through the rest of the game.
There is also the Windows version, which was released in North America on September 22nd, 2000, in the United Kingdom on October 20th, and in other European and Asian territories, excluding Japan, in late 2000. This version was published by Microsoft Games and developed by Digital Dialect. It supports the use of a keyboard or a USB game controller with at least 6 buttons, with the manual recommending the Sidewinder Gamepad Pro. It also supports direct 3D capable video cards, allowing for a high resolution of up to 1024 by 768. They're getting up there.
Oh, baby.
Now, the Windows version is labeled Metal Gear Solid on the packaging, but the actual game uses the Metal Gear Solid Integral logo, although it has some differences as well from the PlayStation version of Integral and lacks some of its content. The most significant change was reducing the number of discs from 3 to 2, which was done by giving each disc 2 separate executable files, one for the main game and the other for the VR training portion, thus eliminating the need for a standalone third disc. One notable omission was the removal of the cutscene before the Psycho Mantis battle, in which he reads the player's memory card and activates the vibration function on the player's controller if a DualShock is being used, as, of course, this scene involved the use of PlayStation-specific peripherals. The method for defeating Mantis was also changed from using a second controller to simply using the keyboard, regardless of whether the player was using a game controller or not up to that point. Other omissions include the removal of the 8th codec frequency, which featured written commentaries by the developers, Meryl's alternate sneaking outfit, and the mission logs when loading a save file. However, the Windows version adds the option to toggle moving and shooting in first-person view mode at any time, regardless of difficulty setting, and players can now save their progress at any point without contacting Mei Ling through the use of quick saves. On the VR training portion, all 300 missions, as well as the photoshoot mode, are available from the start, although the opening video and the 3 unlockable preview trailers from the PlayStation version have been removed. Scoring 83 on Metacritic's site, the game was criticized for graphic glitches, the aged nature of the port, and being virtually identical to the PlayStation version.
A remake, Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, was developed by Silicon Knights under the supervision of KCE Japan and released for the GameCube in North America, Japan, and Europe in March 2004. Although Twin Snakes was primarily developed at Silicon Knights, its cutscenes were developed in-house at Konami and directed by Japanese film director Ryuhei Kitamura, reflecting his dynamic signature style, utilizing bullet time photography and choreographed gunplay extensively. While the storyline and settings of the game were unchanged, although a select few lines of dialogue were rewritten more closely resembling the original Japanese version, a variety of gameplay features from Sons of Liberty were added, such as the first-person aiming and hanging from bars on walls. Another change in the English voice acting was the reduction of Mei Ling's, Naomi's, and Natasha's accents, as well as the recasting of Gray Fox from Greg Eagles, who still reprises the role of the DARPA chief, to Rob Paulson. The graphics were also updated to match those of Metal Gear Solid 2. There was also a Master Collection version. While the original version of Metal Gear Solid was re-released in October 2023 for PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, Nintendo Switch, and Windows via Steam as part of the series of re-releases, it was titled the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection. The title is available as standalone download with the original Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake included as bonuses, with all 3 titles also included as part of a compilation titled Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1, along with re-releases of Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3, both available as separate downloads as well. In the Master Collection, the game runs on an emulator developed by M2, with the option to play any of the 7 regional versions, which included Japanese, North American, European English, German, French, Italian, and Spanish, of the game via additional downloads, as well as the integral VR Missions Special Missions expansions. The Master Collection Edition handles the Psycho Mantis mind reading event by giving the player the option to create a virtual memory card with save files from supported games in order to trigger specific lines of dialogue. There's also a new animated sequence when the player reaches the blast furnace, which visually depicts the disc swapping process.
Now, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, there's a lot of related media to it. The first being a Japanese radio drama version of Metal Gear Solid, directed by Shioyo Murata and written by Motosada Mori, was produced shortly after the release of the original PlayStation game. 12 episodes were aired from 1998 to 1999 on Konami's Club DB program. The series was later released on CD as a 2-volume series titled Drama CD Metal Gear Solid. Set after the events of the PlayStation game, Snake, Meryl, Campbell, and Mei Ling, all portrayed by their original Japanese voice actors, pursue missions in hostile third world nations as Foxhound. The new characters introduced include Sergeant Alan Ishiiba, voiced by Toshio Furukawa, a Delta Force operative who assists Snake and Meryl, Colonel Mark Cortez, voiced by Asamu Saka, an old friend of Campbell who commands the fictional Asteria Army Special Forces, and Captain Sergei Ivanovich, voiced by Kazuhiro Nakata, a former war buddy of Revolver Ocelot from his SVR days. Now, in September of 2004, IDW Publications began publishing a series of Metal Gear Solid comics, written by Chris Aprisco and illustrated by Ashley Wood. The comic was published bi-monthly until 2006, lasting 12 issues fully covering the Metal Gear Solid storyline. The comic was adapted into a PlayStation portable game, Metal Gear Solid digital graphic novel. It features visual enhancements and 2 interactive modes designed to give further insight into the publication. Upon viewing the pages, the player can open a scanning interface to search for characters and items in a 3-dimensional view. Discoveries are added to a database which can be traded with other players via Wi-Fi. The mission mode allows the player to add collected information into a library. This information must be properly connected to complete a mission. Metal Gear Solid digital graphic novel was released in North America on June 13th, 2006, Japan on September 21st, and the PAL region on September 22nd. In 2006, the game received IGN's award for Best Use of Sound on the PSP, competing against 7 other games total. A DVD version is included with its sequel, Metal Gear Solid 2 Bande Dessinée, which was released in Japan on June 12, 2008. The DVD version features full voice acting. And a novelization based on the original Metal Gear Solid was written by Raymond Benson and published by Del Rey. The American paperback edition was published on May 27, 2008, and the British edition, was published on June 5, 2008. A second novelization by Kenji Yano, written under the pen name Hitori Nojima, Metal Gear Solid Substance 1, was published by Kadokawa Shoten in Japan on August 25, 2015. This novelization is narrated through a text file written by a young man living in Manhattan in 2009, which is the present year of the plant chapter in Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. The story also acknowledges certain plot elements from Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain regarding certain characters, such as Liquid Snake and Psycho Mantis.
So let's move toward the end of the episode where we talk about how this game was received. Prior to release, the game's demonstrations at several trade shows between 1996 and 1998 had received a positive response. This had generated significant worldwide interest in the game prior to its release in 1998. Metal Gear Solid received universal acclaim, according to Metacritic. PlayStation official magazine, UK Review, called Metal Gear Solid the best game ever made, unputdownable and unforgettable. The review by IGN opined Metal Gear Solid came closer to perfection than any other game in PlayStation's action genre and called it beautiful, engrossing, and innovative in every conceivable category. Computer and Video Games compared it to playing a big-budget action blockbuster, only better. Arcade Magazine praised it for introducing a brand new genre, the sneak 'em up, and said it would herald a tidal wave of sneak 'em ups. They called it a brilliant, technically stunning, well-thought-through release that's sure to influence action-adventure games for many years. GMR called it a cinematic classic. GamePro called it this season's top offering and one game no self-respecting gamer should be without, but criticized the frame rate that occasionally stalls the eye-catching graphics. GameSpot was critical of how easy it was for the player to avoid being seen, as well as the game's short length, calling it more of a work of art than an actual game. Next Generation reviewed the PlayStation version of the game, rating it 5 stars out of 5, and stated that rest assured that this is a game no player should miss, and the best reason yet to own a PlayStation. Metal Gear Solid received an Excellence Award for Interactive Art at the 1998 Japan Media Arts Festival. During the second annual Interactive Achievement Awards, the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences nominated Metal Gear Solid for Game of the Year, Console Game of the Year, Console Action Game of the Year, and Outstanding Achievement in Interactive Design, Software Engineering, and Character or Story Development. In 1999, Next Generation listed Metal Gear Solid as number 27 on their top 50 games of all time, commenting that MGS is one of the most vibrant efforts in gaming history to bring serious ideas to games.
Now, sales were pretty crazy overall. Prior to its North American release, an estimated 12 million demos for the game were distributed in 1998. And upon release, the game was a commercial success. It became one of the most rented games in the United States and top sales charts in the United Kingdom and Japan. PC Data, which tracked sales in the United States, reported that Metal Gear Solid sold 1.06 or 1,060,000 copies and earned $51,834,077 in that era, which equates to almost $100 million in 2023, and all of that was in revenue during 1998 alone. This made it the country's fifth best-selling PlayStation release of 1998 and the third highest grossing PlayStation title that year. In Europe, the game grossed €40,034,122, or equivalent about 42, almost 43 million US, equivalent to about 78 in today's standards, and that was in 1999, adding up to the equivalent in today's standards to 176,656,000. And that was grossed in the United States and Europe by 1999. And by early 2001, it had sold 6 million units worldwide, including 1 million units in Japan and approximately 5 million units in the United States and Europe. It went on to sell more than 6.6 million units worldwide by 2002, and by 2004, the original release had sold 5.51 million, and Integral had sold 1.27 million for a combined 6.78 million units worldwide. As of July 2009, the game had sold over 7 million units worldwide, and in the US, 2.81 million units were sold as of 2007. Now, despite its high success, even in sales, Kojima, during an interview with Jeff Keighley in 2014, revealed that Metal Gear Solid sales expectations were low and said, quote, "Neither I nor anyone else expected Metal Gear Solid to sell at all. I didn't think at all of how to make this game sell well because I didn't expect it to sell."
And so, as far as the legacy of Metal Gear Solid, it's credited with popularizing the stealth game genre. The idea of the player being unarmed and having to avoid being seen by enemies rather than fight them has been used in many games since. It is also sometimes acclaimed as being a film as much as a game due to the lengthy cutscenes and complicated storyline. IGN called it the founder of the stealth genre. The game is often considered one of the best games for the PlayStation and was featured in Best Video Games lists by Computer and Video Games in 2000, by Electronic Gaming Monthly and Game Informer in 2001, by Retro Gamer in 2004, by GameFAQs and GamePro in 2005, and by Famitsu. Hyper Magazine in 2001 called it probably the single best game on the PlayStation. According to OneUp.com, Metal Gear Solid cinematic style continues to influence modern action games, such as Call of Duty. Metal Gear Solid, along with its sequel, Metal Gear Solid 2, was featured in the Smithsonian American Art Museum's exhibition, The Art of Video Games, in 2012. During August 2015, Eurogamer reanalyzed the game's technical and overall impact and claimed that Metal Gear Solid had been nothing less than the first modern video game. In September 2015, Metal Gear Solid was voted the best original PlayStation game of all time by PlayStation.blog's users. In May 2023, GQ listed Metal Gear Solid as the 7th best video game of all time, according to a team of video game journalists across the country.
And as we wrap up, the bests of, the numbers, the dollars, it's all really well deserved, and we see why this series still continues today. And I love the idea, and we see this in a few different genres of taking over. It's always the third ones, Fallout 3, bringing over like Morrowind, getting kind of like a third one to kind of bring into that modern era. It's such a cool way of taking it, and Kojima being like, listen, we just made a cool game that we liked. No one was going to buy it. It's cool that people did, is a huge statement. And I think it is true. As much as I'm not a huge fan of stealth games, this truly was the turning point that changed the stealth game forever.
Absolutely. And not just, I think, changing the stealth game, it's just that video games as a whole were not so much about avoiding conflict. They were about sort of charging into conflict head on for the most part. Whereas this game sort of takes a totally different approach where it's like, look, you're overmatched. You got to sneak through all this stuff to get to the end goal. Like, that's a tough thing to do. And to say that this is sort of the turning point toward modern gaming, I think is a very big statement for a reviewer to make. But I don't, while I don't think that it's like all the games that we have in the modern age are a sum of all the games that came before it. So I think it's maybe a little bit inflammatory. I don't know, like just disingenuous to say like this is the first modern video game that existed, you know, as far as like that criteria goes.
Sure.
I do see the massive influence it's had across a wide variety of genres, you know, in that the stealth genre now, I mean, you have massive games that started as more of a stealth approach, like the Assassin's Creed games, for instance, where it was about originally trying to get in and out as stealthily as possible. Now it's a little different than that, but there has been, I think, a wide appeal for the stealth type of play. Stealth Archer is like the memed type of character in Skyrim. You know, it doesn't matter what you do. It's somehow you end up being a stealth archer. So I think that it's just a great concept that maybe the video game world wasn't sure how to do right until Metal Gear Solid came about. What I find more impressive about Metal Gear Solid personally is the cinematic aspect. I think that is really what takes a game into the modern realm, the modern equivalent, because I think that we are getting very theatrical video games and have been for a long time, but that wasn't necessarily the case before Metal Gear Solid. And I can't think of any games that did set out to be sort of almost like an interactive film, like a lot of modern games feel like today.
And we see that trend follow a lot with the PlayStation line, going into like Drake's Uncharted, going into even like the Miles Morales Spider-Man, or even the Spider-Man before that, taking on these things that are, yes, much more action-oriented than they are stealth in a way, but still telling such cinematic stories that really draw you in, that aren't just the idea of, if we want to call it pre-modern game, of like, yes, gameplay mechanics first, story can kind of be there, doesn't really matter, into what if we integrate both to make you want to know more about the characters and what's going on, versus just like, yeah, let's skip that. Let me just get back to the shooting type thing.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, having Metal Gear Solid be able to do this, and I want to bring it up first and kind of derail, talking about not only did they bring it up with such cool character designs and cinematics, but I want to touch more on Psycho Mantis a bit, and just like the craziness that entails. We had talked about this previously on a bonus episode that was more of like, I think it was the top bosses, the top villains. It's such a cool way to integrate it, where when you're playing on the original PlayStation, Psycho Mantis would read off different games that were like Konami games or Konami adjacent. It would tell you about your save file. They would threaten to delete your save file. They would make your controller not work, so you'd have to unplug your controller and plug into your second player controller slot. Name another game that even tried that at that time to like work in these things that was just so wild. Like, it like made news headlines of just how creepy it was. People being freaked out about, I mean, right now we have AI in our pockets and everyone's just cool with it reading everything.
Sure.
But back then, it was just wild to be like, hold on. The video game knows the games I've played and like how far I am in these. No, I'm done. So that, even if you didn't bring the story elements into it, like that alone brings it to that crazy modern era of just knowing what like better hardware mixed with software can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think just a crazy approach to a villain when you're trying to do something totally different, totally off the wall. And it's like, hey, like, let's get them physically involved in this fight. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they gotta run and like go and switch the controller port really fast. That's crazy. It reminds me of Mr. Rossetti in Animal Crossing, although polar opposite
Yeah.
ends. Mr. Rossetti was not a boss fight. He was just a long-winded reminder not to cheat the world of Animal Crossing. But to have I that was really my first experience with something like this, where you know, he knew, "Oh, you didn't save, you just reset." That's not cool. And that sort of blew my mind of like, how could he possibly know
Mm-hmm.
that? Of course, there's an internal clock, so that's how he knew. But yeah, I mean, just implementing those sort of features to catch gamers off guard, and then he's talking about I didn't even know how to come up with the strategy of how to sell this game. I mean, that boss fight alone is gonna sell the game. People are gonna talk about that. You know,
Absolutely.
that's the whole marketing right there, is just word of mouth. So maybe he didn't know that, but I have to have a feeling that people are gonna want to talk about that, whether they played the game or not.
Oh yeah, and you know, having such a large marketing budget going back that way, and then divvying out millions and millions and millions of demos is so wild. Like that, like again, I love having digital platforms. I love being able to get games instantly, or like through Steam, or like I still have cartridges for like the Switch. But it was so cool getting like a demo in the mail, or getting it like as part of like another promotion with another game tie-in. It was so neat and such a unique experience. So it's such a cool marketing tactic that really was able to sell this and make it a household name.
And really maybe a little bit of a meta point, but when we think about the modern world of gaming and game development, I don't know that we would have gotten a Metal Gear Solid, because having been the third in a series of games that was largely not that successful, and then, Kojima comes out and says, "We just made a game, that we wanted to make. The expectations weren't that high." Like, to get that game made today, it would be impossible almost, unless you found all the funding yourself. So, a totally different world, and you see how big of an impact that it had, because someone just said,
Yeah.
"Sure, keep making the games, like, it'll get figured out. The expectations aren't that high, but we want to make this game still."
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's really what brings us to this final point of Derek. As always, lets people know, why did we choose it and what do you give it?
Yeah, I think I love stealth games. I'm a little bit on the opposite end of Alex there. I think that they are a lot of fun. They can be a little bit overly meticulous at times, and if they're not done right, they can be incredibly frustrating. But when they are done right, when you can actually sneak, when you do feel like you're not being seen through the wall, or finding these very frustrating moments in the sneaking world where you just can't fully move the way you want, which I think modern games do a pretty good job of, they're a lot of fun. And Metal Gear having that influence on stealth games, having been sort of, in my opinion, a stepping stone toward a more cinematic type of video game experience, I think is a huge plus as well. So I've been handing these out a lot, but I'm going to give this one another 10.
Ooh, baby. Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. I'm not a huge, as I'd said earlier, not a huge fan of stealth, but I mean, this started it. And it started in a way that wasn't just tedious. It wasn't tedium of restarting constantly, of like, oh, I got found. Sorry, I got to restart.
Yeah.
There were ways to like go back and try and get away from it and kind of fight your way through some of that stuff. So fantastic. If I had to give it a rating, I would give it the speedrunner's choice of the Boba Skip out of 10.
Wow. That was a quick one.
Oh, I got it down for you.
Research for this episode was done by Alex Kindle and Derek Baker. The intro and outro music was given to us by our friend Evan Barr, and our lovely artwork was provided by Aaron Shattuck.
Lovely people, and lovely people as always. Those over on our Patreon. You can check us out at patreon.com/finishthefight, where you have some really cool physical, digital rewards. Want to give a shout out to a few select members today with Snide T-Bird, Nick Hyman, and Anthony Gooch. Thank you so much for your support.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or most likely your favorite podcast listening platform. If you haven't yet, please drop us a review. It helps us out a lot. We love to hear from you. There are also Q&As within every episode. If you are on the Spotify platform where we ask questions about the episode, give us a response and maybe yours will be published.
Absolutely. You can also check us out on Twitch. You can see me at twitch.tv/Sourman70. That's twitch.tv/SOURMAN70, as well as Derek over at twitch.tv/TheBakerMan247. That is twitch.tv/TheBakerMan247.
You can follow this podcast on Instagram or Twitter. We are also on Discord. It's free to join. There is a link in the description of every episode, and we'd love to see you there.
And with that, that has been our coverage of Metal Gear Solid. Are there any other, as we cover all of them, Game of the Years, Game of the Worlds, Game of the Forevers, best games of all time? Let us know if there's anything that you saw that has changed a genre, formed a genre, or has destroyed the genre. Let us know. We may do an episode about it. As always, I'm your host, Alex Kendall.
And I am your host, Derek Baker.
And this has been Finish the Fight, a gaming podcast.